Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth was published in 1961. It remains one of the important texts in postcolonial theory, political philosophy, and revolutionary psychology. Written during the Algerian War of Independence, the book is not a historical account nor a humanitarian plea directed at Europe. As Sartre notes, Fanon speaks to the third world about itself. His audience is the colonized subject, and his objective is to chart the violent, necessary trajectory through which a subjugated thing transforms into a self determining human being. Fanon's important insight is that colonialism is not a system of misrule or an economic arrangement to be renegotiated. It is a totalizing apparatus of absolute violence that shatters the history, culture, psychology, and social fabric of the colonized. Fanon opens with an uncompromising declaration. Decolonization is always a violent phenomenon. To understand why violence is an inescapable necessity, one must grasp his structural definition of the colonial world as compartmentalized, Manichaean universe divided into two mutually exclusive zones. The settler's town is strongly built, brightly lit, and paved with asphalt, a place of abundance and legal protection. The natives' quarters, the shanty town, the reservation, is a place of starvation, congestion, and structural neglect, where people die of hunger and disease, crouched on top of one another. This spatial division is enforced not by economics alone, but by the police officer and the soldier. Because this inequality defies any universal morality, the colonizer must dehumanize the native entirely. The native is described in animalistic zoological terms: reptilian motions, breeding habits, inherent criminality. By reducing the native to less than human, the settler justifies physical force while exempting themselves from the very human rights they profess at home. The native is stripped of language, history, and tradition and left in a state of cultural and spiritual paralysis. Because the colonial system was built and maintained by absolute settler violence, it cannot be dismantled by polite dialogue. Decolonization is the total substitution of one species of man for another, a radical tabula rasa. The violence of the colonized is a dialectical, mirrored response to the violence of the colonizer. But Fanon assigns a positive and therapeutic quality to revolutionary counter-violence. Structurally, shared armed struggle binds the colonized together, dissolving the tribal rivalries and regional splits that colonialism cultivated to divide and rule. Individually, violence acts as a cleansing force. Under colonial oppression, the native suffers from deep inferiority complexes and political paralysis. When the colonized subject takes up arms, they smash both the external oppressor and the internalized image of their own servitude. Violence restores self respect and allows the native to re enter history as a conscious agent. Now, Fanon turns to a cautionary analysis of revolutions that are hijacked. His critique of the national bourgeoisie remains one of the most predictive analyses of post-colonial stagnation ever written. Unlike the European bourgeoisie, which built factories and revolutionized production before seizing power, the colonial national bourgeoisie is a sham. It consists of urban intellectuals, shopkeepers, and civil servants who emerged under colonial administration. Westernized and mimicking European tastes, this class possesses no genuine economic power. When they take power, their goal is not to transform the economy or distribute wealth to the impoverished masses. Their sole objective is to replace European administrators, seize privileged positions, and enrich themselves as quickly as possible. Because this bourgeoisie is terrified of the radical energy of the rural masses, they actively seek compromise with colonial power. They run to the settlers and say, "We are still capable of stopping the slaughter. Act quickly if you do not want to put everything in jeopardy." This dynamic produces neocolonialism: formal legal independence, a flag, an anthem, and a seat at the UN. while the colonial power maintains absolute economic control through trade monopolies and resource extraction. The national bourgeoisie becomes a mere transmission belt for Western capitalism, managing extraction for foreign corporations while skimming profits. When the promised liberation fails to materialize for the masses, the state faces popular anger. To suppress it, the bourgeoisie abandons democracy and establishes a single party dictatorship, the cynical, naked dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. The state rules through police intimidation and administrative bullying. To mask stagnation, it relies on two strategies. One, prestige spending, grandiose government buildings and luxury hotels in the capital, while the rural interior rots. And the second is cult of the leader, a charismatic hero whose moral authority shields bourgeois profiteering. Eventually, as resources dry up, national consciousness cracks apart and the elite falls back on vulgar tribalism, religious rivalries, regional chauvinism, plunging the young nation into internal conflict. Fanon's class analysis radically departs from orthodox Marxism. In classic Marxist theory, the urban industrial proletariat is the revolutionary vanguard, while the peasantry is dismissed as conservative and backward. Fanon flips this hierarchy entirely for the colonial context. In a colonized country, the urban proletariat, factory workers, dock workers, civil servants, occupies a structurally privileged position. They enjoy regular wages and urban amenities absent elsewhere. Because they have a stake in the urban colonial economy, they tend to be reformist, not revolutionary. They want higher wages and better conditions, but they hesitate to support total violent restructuring that might disrupt their livelihood. The peasantry, in contrast, is a true reservoir of revolutionary energy. In the rural interior, away from westernized cities, the peasant experiences the unmitigated brutality of colonialism: stolen land, forced labor, starvation, constant military policing. The peasant has nothing to lose and everything to gain. They do not seek integration into the colonial structure, they demand its absolute destruction. Moreover, isolated from colonial schooling, they have preserved collective solidarity and traditional resistance. When the peasantry rises, they do not ask for reforms. They demand a complete reallocation of land and a total overthrow of the existing world order. As colonial capitalism disrupts rural agriculture, millions of displaced peasants flood into the cities, creating a desperate class living in shanty towns, the Lumen proletariat, the permanently unemployed, petty criminals, pimps, prostitutes, and street vendors. Fanon identifies this group as one of the most spontaneously and violently radical forces. They live in the shadow of the settler's town, experiencing deep alienation daily. Disconnected from the formal economy, they are not bound by fear of losing a job. Fanon warns that the lumpen proletariat is a double edged sword. If the revolutionary movement does not organize and give political direction to this group, the colonial administration will bribe them as informants and mercenaries. But if the revolutionary leadership aligns with the lumpen proletariat, they become an unstoppable urban force that can carry the armed struggle directly into the heart of enemy strongholds. Fanon traces the psychological evolution of the colonized intellectual through three distinct phases to show how a genuine revolutionary national culture is born. First is assimilation. The native intellectual, trained in the mother country's universities, seeks to prove equality with the white master by unconditionally adopting Western philosophy, styles, and values. Their mind is completely colonized. They distance themselves from their own people. The second phase is rediscovery and romanticism. When the intellectual realizes they will never be accepted as equals by the racist settler society, they experience a psychological shock. They turn away from Europe and plunge into their own history, glorifying pre colonial empires and celebrating traditional customs. But Fanon criticizes this phrase as insufficient. The intellectual treats culture as a static collection of mummified fragments and folklore, outer garments rather than the living reality of the suffering masses. They look at their people from the outside. The third phase is the fighting phase. The intellectual finally realizes that reciting poems about the past will not break physical chains. They abandoned the isolated study, joined the armed struggle, and put their knowledge at the service of the revolution. They no longer revived dead customs but joined the people in creating a living future. Fanon draws a vital distinction between custom and culture. Custom is static, repetitive, often a deterioration of culture under colonial petrification, harmless, ornamental, and frozen. True culture is dynamic, revolutionary, and always in the making. It cannot be separated from material struggle. A national culture is not dances, folklore, or ancient artifacts. It is the collective consciousness of a people in action. The songs composed on the front lines, underground newspapers, the shifting roles of women in combat units, and shared political education. The struggle for national sovereignty is the ultimate cultural act because it restores the material conditions that allow a people to create a new civilization. Fanon was a practicing psychiatrist, head of the Blida Joinville Psychiatric Hospital in Algeria. The final section of The Wretched of the Earth provides a chilling clinical case study that anchors his political philosophy in empirical reality. Imperialism is a structural disease that systematically destroys the mental health of everyone within its reach. Fanon documents cases of Algerian freedom fighters and civilians suffering from deep anxiety, post traumatic stress, paranoia, and dissociative disorders from constant exposure to torture and military raids. He also shows that the oppressors are mentally deformed. He presents the case of a European police torturer who spent 10 hours a day beating and electrocuting prisoners. The man began to hear the screams of his victims inside his own home and eventually suffered a total breakdown, beating his own wife and children. Colonialism is inherently pathological. It forces humans to perform subhuman acts of cruelty, destroying their emotional stability and moral boundaries. Fanon also dismantles the racist myth of native criminality. Colonial scientists claimed that North Africans and black people had a congenital criminal disposition, pointing to high rates of internal violence, tribal feuds, random stabbings, domestic disputes. Fanon offers a brilliant counter syndromic explanation. This internal criminality is a direct product of the colonial environment because the native is surrounded by the terrifying, unassailable violence of the colonial state. They cannot direct anger at the real source of oppression, the settler. If a native attacks a settler, they face immediate execution or torture. Consequently, pent up anger turns inward, exploding against neighbors, friends, and family members over minor incidents. This is collective self destruction inside a closed circle. Fanon points to a fascinating psychiatric phenomenon. After the outbreak of the Algerian Revolution in 1954, rates of common law crimes, random homicides, and petty disputes among Algerians dropped dramatically to near zero. The explanation is deeply political. The war of national liberation nationalized and socialized collective emotional energy. The anger previously turned inward in self destructive criminality was now channeled outward toward the occupying power. The revolution acted as a massive psychological stabilizer, transforming chaotic rage into a disciplined revolutionary action and healing the fractured psyche of the colonized subject. To conclude, Fanon steps back to issue an urgent global warning against the temptation to use decolonization simply to catch up with or copy Europe. European model of civilization, while professing humanism and reason, has murdered men everywhere it has gone. Europe's wealth was built on the skulls, sweat, and stolen resources of the colonized world. The European working class has been largely co opted by imperialist profits, leaving Western nations rushing headlong into a moral and spiritual abyss. For the young independent nations of the Third World to mimic European institutions, technology, and lifestyle would be a disaster. It would simply recreate the same exploitative class structures, racial hierarchies, and imperialist dynamics under a different colored elite. The goal of the Third World is not to become a competitive rival to European capitalism or Soviet industrialization. The fundamental challenge of the post colonial era is to work out new concepts, pioneer a fresh path, and set afoot a new man. This new man is the ultimate product of a successful socialist national revolution, created through a process where the old divisions of class, tribe, and region are permanently erased through collective democratic struggle. This new humanity does not define itself through the exploitation of others, nor does it retreat into a blind isolationist worship of the past. It combines a clear critical national consciousness with a universal commitment to human dignity, equality, and mutual respect.